love. It took, it wasn't like, the nice part about it is it wasn't quick. It wasn't love at first sight. It was kind of like this slow dance, this friendship where we sat in the car at the end of my shift and talked about anything and got to be really good friends. Some of you, oh look, you're holding hands right now. I've inspired you. So this was really a complete change for me. Out of Southern California, she turned to me one day and she said, "Hey, let's get out of here." We packed up everything we owned in a moving van and headed north. So we stopped in Cayucas and with some friends, then eventually got a house, lived in a house. And while we were living in that house in Cambria, she spotted an ad in the newspaper and it said, "Wouldn't you like to be a guide at Hearst Castle?" So I thought, that's something I could probably do. I'm used to performing. I'm comfortable in front of people. So why not? That sounds great. So I answered the ad and I filled out the application and went to the interview. And there I met Karen Beery, who hired me and then ended up eventually being my supervisor and then mentor. She really taught me that there was more to being a guide in state parks than just talking to people, that there was a way to connect to people. And that was through something we call interpretation. And so I thought this is an interesting concept for performing arts, is we're actually going to have meaningful information for people that might even, who knows, change their life, because they're going to come to a new understanding of why we do what we do and why this place is so special and what makes it special and how in the world can you connect the average visitor to a place like Hearst Castle? What in their life is going to be relevant to this place? And so that became a kind of game, an internal game I kept playing. How am I going to get these folks to understand that? And the lives of people who lived in the 1920s and 30s who built this place. And so it became a real interesting challenge for me. And at some point, Karen Beery said, "You know what you ought to do? You ought to help me train the guides at Hearst Castle now." And it was kind of easy for me because my night job, by the way, I was hired as what they call, fancy expression, a permanent intermittent. Which is basically fancy California State Park talk for part-time job, okay? So I had this part-time job as a guide in the day, and at night, I was working at the gas station, right? At night. So the night shift at the gas station tends to be very slow, and I was, waiting on gas. So I sold a 6-pack of beer about every hour, And in the meantime, I had this training manual for Hearst Castle, and it was the size of a New York City phone book, because there were 50,000 items of art in that inventory, and it's your job to learn about every aspect of that place. All the statues, the architecture, how long it took to build, the architect herself, who was Julia Morgan, a genius. And so I learned a lot about Julia Morgan too, and Hearst, and this magnificent project. And before I got there, I'm not sure I could have told you the difference between applied art and fine art. But by the time I had been there a couple of years, I knew I had to know. It's not that I wanted to, I had to know something about every single piece in that inventory. Because I was terrified someone would ask me a question, right? And I had to have the answer. So I'm at night in the gas station studying, and then the next day I would get up and do tours. Then, Lori again, great suggestion, Lori, thank you. She said, "You ought to play at the nightclub. There's a place called the Cambria Pines Lodge, and they're," you know it, right? "And they're accepting, auditions for their nighttime work." And so I drug my guitar over to Cambria Pines Lodge, and I pulled out my, guitar and started playing songs. And they said, "Yeah, you're great. You got Thursday, Friday nights," or whatever it was. So now I was working at the gas station, working at Cambria Pines Lodge, and giving tours. It wouldn't have been unusual for me, by the way, to finish a set at the Cambria Pines Lodge at 1 and then go home. And of course, I'm gonna fall asleep immediately? No. I'm gonna stay up a little while and watch old stupid movies, and then I'm gonna fall asleep, and the next day, I'm gonna get up and start doing tours. And I could do this when I was in my 30s, you know, so I do it now. So I had to learn something about everything, and what you're seeing, of course, is the outdoor pool, the Neptune pool. And I kind of fell in love with this place, and I got to drive up every morning and through in the early hours when the shadows were long. It was a photographer's dream. Or then they started doing night tours there. And so I got to watch the sunset over the Pacific. And then it got to be dark, and then now it's a magical place. Now it's completely different. We see things differently in the dark. We're closer to our dream state in the dark. Storytelling is told best in the dark, right? Around a fire. We still do it, by the way. It's called a TV set. But we watch that glow in a dark room. That's why we go to movie theaters, right? To get into that space where you're close to the dream state. We are such stuff as dreams are made of, and our little lives are rounded with a sleep. Shakespeare was right. We are these things. The little lives he's talking about, and the rounded part is birth to life to death. But in there's all these great stories. But then I'm extrapolating. So I got to watch the sunset over Hearst Castle, and it was really magical. Lori actually helped me one time dress up in the 1930s and pretend that we were guests of Mr. Hearst in what they called their living history program. That was a lot of fun. We got to sit at the poker table and pretend we're playing poker in the big assembly room, you know. And then you go into the refectory and you see this magnificent setting here. And when you look at this photograph, I mean, pictures are worth 1,000 words, of course. To me, and to most of us, it looks like something you might see in Europe, a church refectory where the priests and monks might have eaten, but they wouldn't have done so with priceless tapestries on the wall. And then you get to see it at Christmas time.
Yeah.
Right? And why did I ever leave this place? I'll tell you. Because I was still part-time. And an opportunity came along for me to get full-time. But there are a whole lot of adventure stories about working there. And a lot of them have to do with the person we call the tourist. The visitor, or as I like to say, the guest, right? There's a big difference between a visitor and a guest, I feel. So when I was teaching Rangers in the academy, I said, you know, listen, we have to stop referring to these people as visitors. Visitors are people that come and go, you know, they may be there, you don't care if they leave, but a guest is somebody you treat differently, right? And so I started treating people like guests, and it was a big changing moment for me. Some of the greatest stuff happened to me on tour with these guests. One was doing a tour 2, which is an upstairs tour, and it takes you a long time to get up to the suites and wind through the upper areas. And we got to what they call the Celestial Suite, which is the guest suite right between the two bells and the bell tower. And I heard this funny little noise coming from this woman's purse. And she had smuggled a dog on the tour. So I didn't know what to do, you know, because I'm still kind of new at this. And do I call day security and tell this woman to get this dog out of here? So we just let the dog go. And so, because I was treating her like a guest. She got all the way down to the bottom of the hill and never got busted. So I felt good about that. And then there's, let me go back one time. Then there was I'm on the main terrace right here in this shot. Because I want to tell you one of the most alarming things that a guest did. It gets really hot on the hilltop. I mean, it could be 68 degrees at the bottom and foggy, and when you get up to the top, it's 100 degrees, right? Yeah, huge difference because you're at 1,500 feet. And so we had a group of Swedes that had come to visit, and there were, I mean, when you think of a Swedish woman, you kind of have an idea, guys, you have an idea what a Swedish woman looks like. You know, tall, blonde, kind of athletic, sort of gorgeous. Well, there were about 5 of them that looked just like that. And they decided, they said, since it was such a hot, sunny day on the main terrace of Hearst Castle,
Oh, no.
that they would peel their tops. And now we have a huge distraction. Actually, several huge distractions. And so now I am calling day security because now mothers are grabbing their children and hiding. Don't look. And because, let's face it, we're far more provincial than the Swedes on these things. And so day security went over there and asked them politely to redress. And they did. Then, the very opposite thing, I'm showing the main terrace again, very opposite thing happened during the winter. Because during the winter you're at 1,500 feet, so it could be mild weather down at the bottom of the visitor center where the people get on the bus. But at the top, we're talking, the deck of the Titanic. I mean, a gale force wind sweeping across this terrace so hard that you could hardly stand up. Seriously, had difficulty standing up. Now, most of the guests that came to the castle were of a certain age. And not all, but in this particular group there was. And they decided to close the hilltop based on how many flying objects there are. We're not going to let any more buses come up to the hilltop because the palm trees are losing their fronds and starting to strike people. So, in fact, one time the chief ranger comes back in, he's got a gash on his head from a palm frond. He says, okay, we're closing. And mine was the last tour before they closed the hilltop. So by this time, the gale force winds had reached a peak. Really, it was blowing hard. And it was so hard that they actually strung a line across the main terrace. And they've got a day security person on one side of the line and another day security person on the other side, and they had tied it off on the stanchions, right? And they said, okay, come across! And literally, we're just hanging on this line as we're trying to get across that terrace into the house. Because once we got in the house, we knew we were safe. Because once the tour was over, you're on the back side of the hill where it's not blowing so hard. But in the meantime, I've got these poor sweet little old ladies and guys, and they're hanging on the line. I'm going, oh my God! And this is so what kind of tour is this? That was a good